All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Sipenko. I'm the CEO of Consilium Scientific, and today we're welcoming Annette and Bhuvan from Egality Health. And Egality Health is the community engagement agency, which is addressing health inequalities in order to improve inclusion in health research. So, very warm welcome from Consilium. The floor is yours. So, Annette, please go ahead.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Lisa. And thanks everyone so much for joining us today. I'm Annette, CEO and founder of Egality, and we are a community engagement agency. So that means that we are focused on addressing health inequalities by improving inclusion in research. And we do that by working with a network of community organisations across the UK and connecting them with the life sciences sector. So we'll tell you a bit more about our approach shortly, but I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Bhuvan to tell a bit more about himself.
Thanks, Annette. Hello, everybody. Really nice to meet you. I am Bhuvan. I am the Projects and Partnerships Manager here at Egality. My background is in the social sciences. I'm particularly interested in understanding intersectional inequalities and learning about how to create sustainable livelihoods. And yeah, really excited to talk about Egality and our work with this wonderful crew.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bhuvan. And as a bit of background on myself, I founded Egality 4 years ago, and it was based on my experience having been chair of a grassroots organisation called Social Action for Health. They're based in North East London, and they do amazing work engaging local communities in health programmes and health research. Alongside that role, I also worked in policy, public affairs and market access for global and UK pharmaceutical companies. And through my 2 roles, I could see a real gap in terms of how we were engaging with people who were underserved by the health system, both in terms of research like clinical trials to develop treatments and innovation, but also research to understand how the system works and how people engage with the system and uptake services and treatments. And so really founded Egality because I saw the opportunity to create this network of community organisations across the UK and really connect them with the life sciences sector to think of new ways to talk about research and all the good work that the life sciences sector does. So next slide, please, Bhuvan. Now we want to hit off with a film that really sort of tells a story and brings to life the work that Egality does. So we are always looking for new creative ways to talk about research. And this film was developed with a spoken word artist called Duke Alderon. And it was to recruit young people to a study on type 1 diabetes. So we're just going to kick you off with a little short trailer of that film.
Do you hide your hypos to save being judged? Do you get so low that fatigue won't budge? Do you feel alone having to deal with so much, yet smile through the struggles because you'll never give up? Have you been running late because of your condition? It's okay to say yes, you don't need permission. Living with type 1 diabetes means making hundreds more daily decisions. Mornings can take longer to get into rhythm.
So that was a 30-second clip of what was a 1.5-minute film that was shared out across social media and across our community partners to engage young people. And it yielded really good results and actually saw a percentage return higher in terms of the diverse ethnic communities and people from socioeconomic disadvantaged backgrounds that we were looking to reach. And I hope that gives you a good flavour in terms of the type of work that Egality is doing to find new ways to recruit to and talk about research. Next slide, please, Bhuvan. So why does equality and diversity in research matter? Well, over the last 4 years since Egality has been founded, there's just been an absolute plethora of headlines that have come to the surface in terms of really understanding the true extent of the lack of diversity in the research that's happening in the sector, and also the impact that that has on the treatments and services that are then developed. For instance, we know that in the US, only 5% of Black Americans are represented in trials, despite representing 13% of the population. A recent BMJ study showed that only 41% of women are represented in cardiovascular trials, despite it being a leading cause of death for women in the UK. And we also know that in genetic studies and the genetic bioresources across the globe, 78% of people are of European descent. And in fact, most of them come from the US, the UK, or Iceland. I could go on and on with the different statistics, but I just want to give you a flavour in terms of the disparities we're still seeing in research today, where conditions are being researched that do not fairly represent those who are disproportionately impacted by them. And this can lead to so many different impacts in terms of where we've seen minority ethnic heart failure patients, 36% more likely to die in the UK. You may remember the situation where Ambien doses had to be cut for women because of being prescribed at a much higher rate because it has been tested on men. And also the plethora of information that's coming through now around how diversity can really have an ultimate impact on how we can spur innovation within science as well. Next slide, please, Bhuvan. For us, it really comes down to three things. Diversity in research means treatments and services that are safe and effective for everyone. It means that we can ensure fair and equitable uptake and adherence to those treatments and services. And that can mean that we can start to really address health inequalities at their core and ensure that we've got an equitable health system where treatments are developed for everyone and accessible to all who need them. Next slide, please, Bhuvan. I believe that's over to you.
Thank you. Yes, and we just wanted to sort of talk to you about how the progress have been over the past couple of years across the UK, the EU, and the US. We now know that the HRA and MHRA are collaborating and working on implementing a guidance to ensure diversity is an important facet of all clinical trials, and as well as sort of nice guidelines which have talked about reducing health inequalities in different kinds of research, and how a lot of research that we support now have to be mandatorily following NICE guidelines in the way they engage with the public. The ABPI has highlighted not only the transformative power of innovative medicines, but also which is just also more giving more access to people from underserved groups and people those who are bearing the greater burden of medical conditions. In the EU, we're also seeing a growing emphasis on diversity and inclusion, such as the EFPIA guidelines, as well as IHI, which is a public-private partnership, and supporting research and sort of almost giving that extra boost to consider diverse patient populations. In the US, of course, we saw the FDA publishing a key piece of guidance to ensure that all trials must have a diversity plan. And this was, of course, groundbreaking, and it also sparked a lot of conversation in the UK on how we can explicitly talk about addressing racial and ethnic inclusion in clinical trials. So that's a bit about how it has changed across the three major areas that we're talking about today, and we're seeing some really positive progress on all of these fronts. On that note, we wanted to ask you a question. Is diversity and inclusion a relevant challenge for you, your work, and your organization? And for this, we're going to quickly take you to Slido. I'm sure a lot of you would have used it before, but if not, you should just be able to scan this particular QR code and join into the discussion. So if you just go to slido.com and scan this QR code or type in the hashtag egality, you should be able to start voting.
I think we can also pop it in the chat as well, the link. I will just give that a go as well, just to see if that, so you've got lots of different ways of reaching it.
Just going to give everybody a minute. And we wanted to sort of base our conversations later on as well on this. Sometimes what is, what are relevant challenges? What are sort of key areas of your organization or your work that face these kind of challenges? And I'm sure those will come through in the Q&A and any discussion that we have. Well, great. So now we know that a large majority of you do consider that diversity and inclusion is not only relevant, but also sometimes tends to be a relevant challenge for you at your work, in your organization. And that brings us to my next question for all of you. What is this particular challenge that you're facing? So what is that one challenge that you've faced in increasing diversity in your research or in your work? If it's relevant, is there a particular pitfall? Is there a particular hurdle that you're unable to overcome? And please feel free to sort of put in your thoughts and your comments. And these are a lot of sort of themes that we have seen in our work as well. Mindset, so just sort of internal, sort of systematic cultural changes and how those need to be driven from the leadership to be able to sort of enable the entire organization to consider diversity and inclusion a priority and sort of find different ways to implement ways to do it. Resistance not only from these sort of structures, but also from communities and societies and funding bodies. And it's pretty common to have those restrictions and resistance as well. And of course, the access to data is always, one of the first hurdles that a lot of researchers that we support come up with, because they're like, oh, we know that there are certain gaps and we know that there are inequalities, but there is just nowhere to begin because we don't know how it impacts people with underserved groups. And yeah, I think that is quite a common problem that a lot of research studies, academics, but also people within the life sciences come up against. Great, so I'm going to break this down and go back to our presentation. Great. So coming from all of these different challenges that you're facing, we know that against this particular landscape of how there is a very growing importance of diversity in the life sciences, we know that health inequalities persist, and we know that we need diversity in research to develop science and to develop treatments that work for everybody. We can see that the health and life sciences sector is shifting. There is like we just discussed, there is a call for health research and trials and science to be inclusive and science to be diverse and representative. And we know that we need to respond to it. We need to respond to this change, to this shift, and we need to ensure that we are equitably representing people who are bearing that disease burden within our populations. And that's the space where we come in to sort of connect people with underserved groups in research to bring new insights, to bring lived experiences, to develop strategies and policies, and in just different ways to sort of include people in the decision making process, include people in the co-production and co-development process, and get access to that data, get access to that knowledge and that expertise that comes from being part of a group that is underserved by research. Over to you, Annette.
Thank you, Bhuvan. So Egality is set to really address the challenges as Bhuvan has set out. And what I really heard from a lot of your responses as well, access to trials, mindset, economics, wealth. We really believe that so much of that comes down to simple baselines around communications and working with communities to do better engagement on the ground. And so we've been working with a network of different organizations within the sector that ranges from pharmaceutical companies, medical research charities, as well as some startups and universities. And we've all been working with them on the challenge in terms of how they can increase diversity of the populations of people that they work with, and how we can advise them to do that, both through improving the communications, how they're talking about their work, and how they're engaging with trusted community organizations. But of course, we can't do that without community organizations, and they are really the core of how Egality works. We were founded 4 years ago by going out and speaking to them initially, asking them what they would want to see with an organization that was going to connect them with the life sciences sector. And from that, we developed principles of engagement that guide how Egality work and steer us strategically to make sure we're keeping community benefits and objectives at the heart of what we do. Our network consists of really grassroots community organizations, charities, CIC, social enterprises, but also working with some health influencers and sort of bigger national trusted health networks who all represent people who are underserved by the health system, underrepresented in research, and who are looking for better representation and ultimately better access and health for the people that they serve. And this ranges from groups representing those from diverse ethnic groups, diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, the LGBTQ+ community, and women's organizations. And we're looking to expand and grow that group as we go through and as we grow as Egality as well.
And how do we do this? So we do this through 4 key areas, 4 key services, if I say. One is, of course, consultancy, where we provide bespoke advice to specific researchers or life science companies and teams, very specifically on programs or projects that they're planning. We conduct reviews of communications or recruitment materials that they might have by ourselves in association with some of these community organizations and stuff like that. We also do and hold and facilitate workshops, focus groups, sort of these listening sessions where the client, where our life science partners can really come in, and it is that sort of open and honest and safe space to ask questions, to sort of get feedback on what trial design, on study design, on questions, on questionnaires, and to really help researchers and to really help our life science and healthcare partners upskill on cultural competency, understand what they're asking, understand how to ask things, and really recognize some of the unconscious biases that they might have. Thirdly, what we do is recruitment campaigns. So these are very specific, with very specific targets that, okay, we need X amount of people from XYZ backgrounds. And we do this through developing creative materials. You saw one of the videos that we did earlier. They are very tailored to the communities we want to reach. They are shared through different sort of online, offline, and informal sort of networks that our community organizations have. We believe in not only the right message, but also the right messengers. And our community organizations are the right messengers, and they help us sort of deliver this right message to the people within their network. And lastly, we support organizations develop ED&I policies and strategies. So these sort of are a culmination of all the work that we do with our community organizations, and what the particular organization that really, what is the need, what is the industry like, what is the sector like. We help them develop these so that it is easier to go on and improve diversity and inclusion in the work that they do. And now we wanted to speak about some case studies. So the first one being NIHR Bioresource. So this was a collaborative communications campaign that we ran with 8 community organizations in the UK to increase diverse recruitment to an IHR bioresource. So just as a quick brief on what the bioresource is, it is an infrastructure of biosamples, and what they do is they facilitate and conduct translational research. So essentially, people donate saliva or blood samples, and in the future, it sort of gets added to a bank of genetic data, which can progress different kinds of research and different kinds of treatments. So this was an amazing introduction to health research and bioinfrastructure to these 8 organizations. And these were organizations that had pretty much never heard of NIHR bioresource before. These were communities that the bioresource wasn't tapped into, wasn't being able to reach. And what we did was deliver a 12-week campaign, and a quick walkthrough of which is, you'll see that these are different kinds of materials and different kinds of content that we created with our community partners. So we're not only working with charities, but we're also working with very specific influencers who have a great reach within the community, such as Dr. Joyce here on the screen. There are some social media posts, there is a collaborative launch film, and then we also expanded into more sort of raw and authentic handheld films by the community members themselves. And we, as you go on to see, there are different kinds of information that we're talking about. We talk about donating blood. We're talking about what the journey is of a volunteer at the bioresource. We're talking about some success stories. Why should you participate? So really trying to tackle the different hurdles or the different barriers that people might have in their minds when they hear about donating blood or donating a saliva sample to an organization as vast as the bioresource. And lastly, some tactics that sort of really worked well was videos in multiple languages. So I think we did about 7 languages. We have just snapshots of 4 of them here. 7 different South Asian languages, which are most popularly spoken in the UK. And then we got some testimonials. We got some videos of healthcare professionals and people with lived experience really speaking from their own experiences and talking to the community about why it's important to take part in research. Why is it relevant and why is it necessary? So wanted to quickly show you one of those testimonial videos. So let me play that for you. Oh, that didn't work.
It's vitally important to have participants from wider walks of life in research, and there are a number of reasons for that. This could be as simple as our own makeup. So this is genetic, that could be different. And what that means is we could have different types of disease, but also how it progresses and how it responds to treatment. We also have different ways of life, and our cultural heritage and also influences where the disease manifests. So it's really important that we capture a range of participants that has those diverse characteristics. Although I'm a researcher and a clinician myself, I have participated in a number of research. These are some novel drugs to giving blood tests. My own personal experience has been very positive. I felt really positive that I was able to contribute to the science, to the society, with a small drop of blood, or the data that they wanted.
So that was Dr. Sunil Daga talking about it. And he is a really influential figure, especially in the Midlands. And the video got very popular within the community. And yeah, that was just one of the ways in which we spread that message. Over to Annette for the next case study.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bhuvan. And I just want to reiterate to everyone as well that we really want to use this opportunity to inspire people in terms of what can be done, in terms of talking about research differently. And we're going to have practical tips at the end and time for Q&A. But if any questions do come up about sort of how we did this, or if you wanted to take it on yourself, how you go about it, do please start dropping those in the chat as well, because we really want to make sure that this is like a very practical and useful session for you by the end of it, and that we can sort of pass on our expertise so you can take this forward as well. So with Crohn's and Colitis UK, we were looking to engage a diverse set of participants living with Crohn's and colitis so that we could really understand the impact that different socioeconomic factors had on their day-to-day lives. And we did this by, again, working with a collaboration of community organisations We met with them first to understand what would really matter to people about this study, how to get the messaging right, what kind of communications materials and channels we should use. And then we developed those and shared them out across those community organisation platforms. Within 3 weeks, over 143 people had signed up from a really diverse range of people from different ethnicities, genders, age. And so we had a wide range to work with when we were looking for only 12 participants specifically for that study. And we also had great hits across over 30 plus social media channels, with one of the top hosts hitting 525 likes. So a really successful campaign. And Bhuvan, again, we can just walk you through how that worked in terms of having a collaborative film at the beginning that really brought all of our partners together, the opportunity to register as that was launched on Crohn's and Colitis UK's website, and then going into more bespoke materials, either doing social media cards that set out the impact of a lack of diversity in research, why we really needed this lived experience insight from the people we were looking to reach, and some specific films from some of the community leaders and the people with lived experience we were working about, talking about why this study was important to them. And we had those translated in multiple languages as well. I think that's everything on Crohn's and Colitis UK. And we seem to be doing pretty well for time. So we'll just chat you through a couple of other studies and then we'll move on to practical tips for you in terms of communications and community engagement. So for the OBS study, we've been working with the team on a large trial that is looking to implement a new care bundle across 36 hospital sites in the UK to improve care for women who've experienced a postpartum hemorrhage. And at the beginning of the study, we spoke to community organisations representing women from diverse ethnic backgrounds and the LGBTQ plus community. And we heard large and clear that both of these groups are feeling very threatened at the moment, both within the sort of political environment that exists within the UK, within a health system that continues to perpetuate health inequalities, and within a maternity system that continues to sadly perpetuate health inequalities as well. So we worked with these groups to completely revamp how the organisation was doing communications. We worked with inclusive designers to bring together the flyers you can see on the screen that really looked at focusing on portraying a much wider diversity of parents and mothers and birthing people within the imagery, as well as really simplifying a lot of messaging around the study. So it hit home in terms of why it was important, but then offered a lot more information in other usable formats, such as a QR code that people could log into. Alongside these, we've also done a lot of films, so another collaborative film and some translated film, just to give the research nurses on the ground a suite of different tools to work with when they're looking to either explain the study or recruit to the sub-studies, and particularly engage with those people who, again, we know are underrepresented in research trials like this overall. And then finally from me, before I hand over to Bhuvan to get into our practical tips, this was a really interesting study where we worked with a pharmaceutical company and also an organisation called National Voices, looking at how we could bring people with lived experience into the decision-making processes of the organisation. And it really focused on reducing hierarchy within the organisation and making sure that people are coming into conversations on an equal level, able to discuss and explore and facilitate key topics that really mattered to the company around recruitment to trials, horizon scanning in terms of identifying unmet need, and also identifying barriers in pathways and access to treatments and systems that people with lived experience could really give them key insights to. And that program is now developing into an ongoing way of working that the organisation has taken on board in terms of how they work with people with lived experience more strategically throughout the program. Over to you, Bhuvan.
Thanks, Annette. So lastly, talking about some practical tips and advice on how to develop inclusive communications, and then we just move on to how to engage community organizations as well. So I think the communications aspect is one of the first key methods to honestly just get the attention of people from underserved groups, get the attention of people, and engage them in a conversation that has very often left them out of it. So we're talking about co-developing messaging and materials, sort of engaging with organizations who understand what these needs are, understand, and it can help you connect with others who are within their network, who can contribute and help you develop materials and develop a message as to why this matters to me and my community. Consistently using inclusive language. So we're seeing a lot of sort of avoidance of the terms such as BAME, a shift towards using terms such as the global majority or diverse ethnic communities instead of using terms such as minorities or terms such as marginalized groups. So just trying to understand trying to understand what the most respectful and inclusive language is and using that. Using, of course, diverse images that represent the population that you're trying to serve and that you're trying to work with. It is really nice for communities and for people to see themselves being reflected in the life sciences, into different communications materials and posters, in websites, everywhere, just sort of seeing themselves being represented, just so that it can really speak to them and a lot more. Sharing materials not only through the traditional ways in which you would be doing, but just trying to sort of brainstorm what are some channels or what are some ways in which we cannot we haven't been sharing materials on, and sort of using those, working with suppliers who create inclusive content. So really sort of taking that inclusion not only on a researcher and a community or a researcher and potential participant way, but also within the way of working as well. So working with suppliers, working with third-party experts who can create inclusion and who can help you with your design of your study. And lastly, I think really focusing the messaging on why your research matters, or on why a particular piece of study, a particular trial matters, not only to the researcher, but to the community. Like, why should I, as an individual, take part in it? Because what does that do for me? What does that do for my family? What does that do for my community? We have seen that really resonate well with members within the UK and in different groups, different underserved groups, because we are sort of, just shifting the narrative and being like, okay, this is why your community would benefit, or this is why our community would benefit if you take part in research. So that's on some tips on inclusive communications. And secondly, just to, a lot of researchers and life science partners that we work with often face this issue of the barriers to trying to engage community organizations, barriers to not being able to effectively really form that partnership. And that is understandable with a system that is often set against community organizations or against communities. And I think just starting from mapping out what the underserved groups that you want to reach are, what is it going to be geographically, contextual, is it going to be a national study, and I'm trying to understand what groups would benefit, and then going to organizations that work with these groups at grassroots levels. These could be larger hub organizations that provide multiple services, or it could be really small scale organizations. And working with them really fairly and ethically, which includes sort of not only building trust by, like we said, co-developing the materials, co-developing a study, but also payment, just also fair reimbursement for people who are giving time, who are giving their expertise, their advice, because nobody owes us their lived experience for free. And I think there's something that we really sort of push for, is fair reimbursement to organizations and their employees and those community members who are part of any process of research. Creating a safe space, of course, to encourage speaking up, taking that time at the start of any project or of any study to really be like, okay, these are the barriers. What are the barriers? These are the things that we want to do, or these are the things that we want to study. What are some barriers that we will come against? And hearing from the people directly, and then going about on how to address them. Keeping engagement more consistent, so avoiding a very common pitfall of recruit and forget. So this could involve sharing communications after the study, involving people in dissemination plans, making sure that if a study is about me and my community, I should also be the one that is involved in knowing what the results are. If I've taken part in a focus group, I would love to know where that study went, what were the conclusions, and just sort of trying to keep me engaged and trying to keep that person or those communities involved at the end stage as well. And then, of course, there's engaging honestly and transparently. Like we say, it's okay not to know, and it's okay not knowing where to start, but it is not okay to be unwilling to learn and unwilling to change. So just being open to change, open to sort of learning more from people, and building trust and setting realistic expectations. So just trying to understand what community organizations can do and what they can do within the system and how can they really help you, but also how you as a researcher or you as a larger organization can support them. How can you invest in the people then? Just those are some of our advices. And now I'll bring the slides down.
Thank you so much. Fascinating, right through all the activities you do and amazing engagement through different media. And so, yeah, very much big thank you for sharing this. I would encourage our participants on the call to turn on their cameras, raise your hands if you have questions, or you can put questions in the chat. And I'd like to kick off the Q&A session. I don't have any systematic view of the problem, so to speak, but being quite familiar with the system in the UK and not well informed with other systems, but having some insight, I have to say I've been always very impressed with UK of how advanced it is in terms of diversity, inclusion, use of languages, how much NHS is doing for it, how much NHR is doing for it, how this has been on the agenda at the top for many, many years. So it's not something recent. So I feel that UK has done a lot of work at the national level to really improve diversity engagement in healthcare. And then I heard some anecdotal feedback, let's say from other countries, that they're nowhere close. And I'm talking European countries here and maybe even the US. So what is your comment on that, if any?
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, it's always good to hear that other people are looking to the UK in this area. I do think the UK are quite far developed just in terms of, as you say, having that additional guidance, documentation. I think seeing, particularly from the MHRA and HRA, that they're going to release guidance soon on diversity in trials is a real step forward. But I think as the UK, we are also looking to the US in that perspective. Obviously, they were ahead of the curve in terms of putting out the FDA diversity guidance. And I feel like that really set a standard for a lot of other countries in terms of looking at where this needs to come from the regulators. We hear from a lot of people we work with that until the regulators set their stall about needing to see diversity in research, other sponsors, other funders will not fall into place. And I think we're excited to see that progression from the UK as well. I think there is a lot of good work happening in the system as well, but that can often happen in silos. You can see really good pockets of research sites doing fantastic work. We've obviously worked with some great organizations that are doing good work in this space. However, in other areas, we do still hear feedback that, researchers can try and push for the diversity, but in some areas, in some trial sites, that just isn't that focus or that isn't that reach. But I think we do have to respect that can often, particularly in NHS, be happening at a trial site or a hospital. We're already facing a really tough time in terms of healthcare funding and just sort of getting patients through the door. So often that can have an impact on the research we're able to deliver, let alone the diversity of the people we're able to bring in as well. But thank you for your question, Lisa. It's always good to hear when the UK is setting a standard or a tone for this space.
Excellent. So there were some comments in the chat that Canada is also doing important work in the domain and putting resources together. So since I don't see any hands, I will with other questions. So I guess my next question is, from the work you've done to date, where do you see the problem lies, to which extent? Because I'm sure it's from both sides, but is the problem that those who should have been thinking about engagement of diverse population and research are not doing enough, don't have enough resources, don't know enough, choosing not to do things, or it's the receiving side, it's the populations who should be part of the research are not sufficiently educated, could care less, for example, too busy with other demands from life to worry about things like that, and they're actually even hard to get to participate in the research. How on the scale of problems, where's the distribution falls? Whose fault is it basically?
Definitely, no, that's a really interesting question. And the people we work with, I think we are sort of understanding the more we realize, the more we speak to different kinds of researchers and different kinds of organizations, we realize diversity and inclusion often comes as an afterthought in a lot of different research ventures, essentially. So these are, and that sort of becomes the sort of first level of hurdle, right? Because you haven't thought about your sample, or you haven't thought about the diversity of your sample until the very end of when you're recruiting your sample, or when you're talking about recruitment. And that is one of the biggest red flags that we see, where if someone comes to us and be like, oh, I have the study starting in the next 5 months, and now we need to sort of get a diverse sample because suddenly I'm hearing about diversity. And so that is, I think, what we're trying to do is really educate and sort of spread that awareness within the research community about, okay, how about we just sort of take this a few steps back? How about we start thinking about diversity? How about we start thinking about samples and effectiveness, and how applicable any study is to a population that is so diverse, that has so many different needs and priorities. And yeah, I think on the other side, there is just a lot of historical mistrust and a lot of sort of trauma from exploitative practices. I think in the past year, a lot of stuff has come to light as well. There was an example, I'm not sure if you came across it, but a radiation experiment done on early migrants from South Asia in the UK. So basically there were South Asian migrants fed rotis, just flatbreads, laced with something that was radioactive, and that was done essentially without community knowledge. That was done without actually informed consent and stuff like that. So a lot of those things, and that's just one example out of hundreds, different kinds of research that has been going on in the past hundreds of years. So in light of that, it is just a lot of sort of mistrust, a lot of fear on what can happen if I take part in a trial. We often get comments on, say, Instagram or something, where there's a recruitment where people are like, oh, they're going to poke us and prod us with needles, and we are test subjects. And that is a sentiment. That is a sentiment in the community, because for a long time that has been true. For a long time that's the kind of feeling and trauma that has been passed on, especially in the post-colonial context. So yeah, I think it's about, for Egality, I think we say the onus lies on the research community to really acknowledge the wrongdoings, to really acknowledge the extensive amount of injustice that has happened, that has been mitigated, and just, how do we move on from here? How do we create better relationships from here? How do we create trust, and how do we build trust in communities from here on?
Okay, thank you so much. And Charlie, please go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Let me ask you operationally. Suppose we want to do, like, my work's on drug safety, and I would like to get information on adverse drug reactions from minority populations, hard to reach populations. When we engage with you, is there a financial exchange that brings the engagement? How do we operationally do that? My goal would be, in the United States, there are a lot of adverse events that we see in minority populations we never hear about. How do we get the silent to have a voice?
Thank you, Charlie. Interesting question to ask again. So I think I completely agree. There are a lot of adverse reactions happening that we don't hear about, particularly where those populations have not been involved in clinical trials. So Egality don't operate in the US, but if we were to advise you on how to operate in the US, I think it's bringing together those trusted networks of community organizations who can help you reach the people who may have been impacted, and working to do social listening projects to really hear from lived experience the impact that people have had. I recognise that there might be a bit of a disparity there in terms of being able to have the data in terms of what drugs people have used, and then being able to know where best to access them. So I think there'd be a really interesting piece of work there to understand, how you get that baseline of where people are in their geographies, and then who you work with to be able to reach them engagement in an effective and authentic way. But very interesting question. I'd love to explore.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. I also have another question for you. If it's very tricky. So if you were to summarize a problem in the UK specifically, there's obviously a problem, you exist, you're busy, and there are a lot of issues to resolve. But how good or how bad is the situation? Would you say in the UK we resolve the issue of engagement and inclusion of diverse populations by 50%, by 60%? We're just at the start. We're so bad, it's just by 10%. So where we are on that scale towards, let's say it can never be perfect, but towards at least something where we can really be proud of in terms of, yes, we do our best. There are a few things we can fix. So are we at the beginning of the journey? We're halfway through. I know it's cannot be measured, but at least to get a feel how bad the situation is or how good it is.
My thinking there is, I think for me, it would be if we had the population of people, like we matched the census data. So the average research trial had a fair representation of the population matched to the UK census data. And I'm trying to remember the percentages off the top of my head from the work that we did, Bhuvan. I don't know if you have them to hand, but I think it was around.
So I think the current sense, the last census that we had, it's about 24.9, so almost 25% identifying as non-white British people within the UK.
And I'd say from the studies that we're looking at the moment, we're probably getting representation more around the 5 to 10% mark. So we're potentially a third, a quarter of the way there in terms of getting that fair representation. But some of the organizations we work with on a longer term basis, we're giving them the bold challenge to say, by 2030, can you be getting the average representation that matches the UK population census data?
But when you talk about this, are you talking about UK trials, right? Not the international trials.
Yeah. In this case, we're just talking the benchmark of if UK trials match the population of the UK population, but I think that'd be a fair benchmark for other countries to look to as well.
And if we look into international trials run by pharma, which are run to get the drug on the market and focusing on mostly centers of excellence, probably in the bigger cities, how well are we doing there in terms of inclusion of diverse populations?
That is a good question, Lisa. And I'm not sure, because I'm not sure if all the data is publicly available as well, in terms of particularly pharma companies providing all of the data that we need to know the ethnic representation that they're having in some of those studies. I know the FDA do some great work on clinical drug trial snapshots in terms of the representation that they're getting, but I think they're mainly government funded trials. And I don't have those percentages to hand, I'm afraid. I think there definitely has been progress, particularly since the FDA have been pushing their diversity guidance over the last nearly 5 years now, I think. But to know exactly where we are, my sense would be a bit less under that 3%, probably more around a quarter, but I would want to probably look at the data to be able to give a fair answer to that.
Okay, yeah, that actually could be very interesting research, and a lot of times this data, well, not a lot of times, but there are enough probably studies where data is published, who was recruited in the study. So yeah, could be very interesting research, because obviously
Absolutely.
pick Olympians of a particular condition to make sure that they survive and the drug works. And obviously trying to get into the diversity may compromise data generation process. All right, so any other questions from the audience?
Yes, I think I have one.
Go ahead, David, please.
If you are going to say that clinical trials must represent the population, there's going to be a problem with small groups. They're going to be very underpowered, and you're going to get wrong answers as a result.
Could you explain what you mean by small group? Sorry.
Well, if you take, if it takes, say, 1,000 people to get a good result, as an adequately powered result, if you have 10% or 13% of one group, that result is going to be unreliable because there aren't enough people in that group. Really, you have to determine the sample size by the power of the trial.
And I agree. I think each sort of person, every trial manager, every sponsor running that trial can make their own decisions in terms of the relative size of that trial, and therefore what is proportionate and fair to be able to do within that. So it might be, if it's a smaller study, perhaps matching the census population data isn't correct, but they could look at perhaps doing a proportional percentage that is relevant to the trial size that they are completing as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so thank you so much for the questions. Fascinating presentation. And thank you so much for the excellent work you're doing. So I think many countries can learn from you, and you can serve as a really excellent example to many other settings to what needs to be done to engage underserved populations. So very much appreciate your time here with us, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone in 2 weeks at our next event. All right. Goodbye, everyone.